Joining me today is Kieu Gavin, a youth advocate in international and community development. As a young activist, Kieu is a passionate advocate in driving youth participation in some of the most important social and environmental issues of our time, including the climate crisis. As the former head of international engagement at Oaktree, Kieu has had a central role in the next generation of youth activists who are working to develop programs that affect systematic change. Welcome, Kieu, and thank you so much for joining me today. Parents, community groups, the industry, media, political leaders have all started to take notice of what is often described as new voices that are being used to draw attention to development and to the climate crisis. I wonder if you could pinpoint the moment that you felt you found your voice for the first time that empowered you to speak up on issues that you felt passionate about.
For me, I think it's been a journey to actually get to where I am now. And I think the first time I really felt truly empowered was when I felt the power of solidarity in the collective. And that was when I was around my peers who shared my concerns about the world that we're inheriting and shared my passions. And in this sort of safe space, I was able to have my values interrogated and challenged and consolidated. And that really set me up to be really comfortable and confident in being able to speak up on issues that I cared about. And I think this is really important to highlight because I know that there are plenty of people who have aha moments when they feel truly confident in their leadership and in their values.
Would you say that there's a growing trend in our nation's leaders that they're listening more to the voice of the next generation and trying to involve them more in decision making?
I think there have been some things that have happened as of recent that force decision makers more so to listen or to consider young people in their decision making. For example, the recent legal win for young people and that the government owes them a duty of care in regards to the climate crisis. It obviously forces leaders to think about young people when they develop policies relating to climate change. But I still think that there's a huge barrier in current leaders overall understanding what it means to actually include young people in decision making. It's not just about considering them, but it's actually centering and actively involving young people who are at the forefront of this crisis to be involved in policy development and in decision making.
It's a cliche, but young people represent the future of Australia, and they are thankfully more diverse than probably ever before in Australia's history. And we have so many young youth leaders from so many different diverse backgrounds in Australia, which I think is one of the most exciting things about the youth movement. They care a lot more about the rest of the world, I think. They have a more global view. As one of those leaders of that next generation, you've worked across the Indo-Pacific region and globally. How has that helped you vocalize, what you think on issues around development, international aid, climate change, and how can young people use their global networks and experience to go on a similar journey as you?
That's a great question. I mean, I completely agree with you when you say that it's just quite incredible to see how diverse my generation is. And that's definitely something I've taken in the work that I've done in international development and what's become really apparent to me. But what's also apparent when we look at issues with this power analysis framework is that young people are marginalized and disenfranchised from formal decision-making spaces. So in my experience, to ensure that we're able to come to informed sustainable development outcomes, we've got to ensure that we centre lived experiences of young people in development, that we elevate marginalised groups to the forefront of change and decision making, and that we, as an NGO sector and other bodies and actors involved in sustainable development have to learn how to strengthen solidarity movements across diverse groups of young people across the region. And that's inclusive of Australia as well. So how do we actually connect like the diversity of young people in Australia with the diversity of youth groups across the Indo-Pacific region and more globally as well? Because ultimately, with sustainable development, we're aiming to rectify power imbalances that systemically disadvantage young people. So ensuring that we actually understand where power lies is a really great starting point in being able to give power to young people and then cede it ourselves as people from global north countries.
We've talked a little bit about climate change and the youth of the world really rallying around that as one of the issues. What makes the perspective of young Australians unique or invaluable to the climate crisis challenge or opportunity of really pivoting to renewable energy as fast as we can?
I mean, off the top of my head, I can probably say I've lived through 6 significant climate crises that have happened in Australia in my lifetime, and I'm not even 23 yet. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that this has been something that's been normalized in my lifetime. And it's because of this that our voices in particular are really crucial to how we tackle the climate crisis, particularly in Australia, because it is a matter of survival for us and for generations to come.
From your viewpoint, what was the one of the biggest successes of the school strikes? What do you think it helped to achieve in the often fairly toxic debate of a decade in terms of what's really needed to tackle climate change?
I think the strikes in particular are a really great demonstration of what allyship and solidarity work looks like, where you've got young people who are spearheading these strikes, spearheading this grassroots organising, and they are very much the faces of this movement. And this is, something that younger generations do so well, because allyship is the only real avenue of building political power and influence. But it's definitely something that should be imbued in policy development, because when we want to arrive at solutions to tackle the climate crisis, they need to be well informed, and they need to be well informed by a diverse array of groups. And that can only really be done when you build trust with people and when you work in solidarity with them.
Why doesn't that happen then? Why don't leaders do more of what you just said?
I don't think enough traditional leaders want to cede power, to put it bluntly, because solidarity building means that you work in collaboration with people, you work as a collective, and it means that you've got to give up or share some power. And this is obviously to the detriment of marginalised groups, because they're disenfranchised from being able to support and to inform policy development, essentially. But there are great examples of where this actually does happen. I think solidarity building in politics happens well when more young people are in politics. And I think that people are starting to catch on, and we see the emergence of more young people in politics in Australia, absolutely in New Zealand and Europe and all throughout the world, where they're putting the climate crisis at the forefront of policy agendas, which is great. It just means that we need to diversify what our politics looks like.
How do young people need to work to give us hope that we can solve the climate crisis? What can young people do into 2022, whether they're 14, 19, or in their 20s? What things can they do?
Get involved in the existing groups that exist, and if they don't exist, create your own and get your friends involved. I think we've just got to be experimental, because as long as young people are disenfranchised from tangible or formal decision-making processes and spaces, we've got to agitate from the outside. And that's the beauty of grassroots organising and the ad hoc movements, is that anyone can really capitalise on a spontaneous moment that happens, and then momentum is built around that. I think if you're passionate and you want to do something to have your voice heard, definitely get involved in various youth groups. And if they don't exist, create your own. Create your own and keep agitating about how the system is failing young people. It's disenfranchising young people. And we've got to make sure that we do have a seat at the table and that we're able to turn harmful and negative stereotypes about young people on its head. And I think this is a great time to give a shout out to some incredible youth-run organisations in Australia. So Seed Mob, which is a First Nations-led organisation that does does a whole heap of climate activism, and they draw upon rich Indigenous knowledge about our climate to ensure that First Nations voices are at the forefront of this issue, because they absolutely need to be centred. And also the Australian Youth Climate Coalition, which is Australia's only youth-run climate org in Australia. It does incredible work around ensuring that we phase out gas in Australia and fracking, and ensuring that we have future-proof climate policies. And then also Oak Tree, which is obviously an organisation I used to work for, that does incredible work in sustainable youth-led development and ensuring that solidarity building is something that's at the forefront of development practice and outcomes, essentially. Young people do remarkable things every day. You see that young people are at the forefront of the climate crisis and the climate crisis activism in the Pacific, and then taking their activism all the way to the UN. I mean, that's quite remarkable stuff. So we're here. I don't think it's a matter of us finding our voice. It's a matter of having our voices heard and then having a seat at the table.
That's a wonderful way to finish. Thank you so much for joining me in this conversation. And I hope that not only there are a whole lot of young Australians that get inspiration from what you said, but I think a whole lot of less youthful leaders who really need to listen about what we need to do, what they need to do differently to make Australia successful in the coming decade. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Dermot. Thanks for having me.